everybody, welcome back to my channel. I'm so excited to share with you a very special guest today, Dr. Lynn Kuo. She is the assistant concertmaster at the National Ballet Orchestra in Canada, and she is just a wonderful educator, wonderful musician. I have learned so much just from watching her videos. She also has her violin boot camp and offers private lessons. So if you are a musician, definitely check it out. You will love her warm personality and just very personable style. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I also want to remind you that a while back I said I would release a video of myself being interviewed by my friend, and once we get to that 100 subscribers mark, I will release that video. So if you haven't subscribed yet, definitely hit that subscribe button and like this video if you enjoy content like this. And without further ado, here's Dr. Lynn. Well, thank you, Lynn. I'm so excited to talk with you.
Yeah, thanks for speaking with me, Jennifer. It's so nice to chat with you, actually.
I was going to ask you, so I read a little bit about you from your webpage, which is actually very detailed.
Oh, okay.
Your journey. So I was trying to prepare for the interview so I could know, what questions to ask. And one of the questions I was thinking of was just like how much support you got from your family in terms of your musical careers.
Yeah, absolutely. My father was really supportive, and my mom too. I mean, the performances that I've done, the fact that they've driven me everywhere to all my lessons and paid for all of my education in outside of school, outside of elementary, high school, and going forward, they completely supported me in that way. And then I just basically got the best, I guess, parental support you could possibly get. And it was really, I have actually, basically, they're the ones who started me on this path. When you think about it, when you have children starting any extracurricular activity, they have their parents to thank for that, because the parents are exposing them to the gifts of the world, right? Because when you think about people who grow up in a place, a neighborhood, or a country or region of the world that is not exposed to a certain activity or education or pursuit, then you may have undiscovered talent, which is a real shame. So if you look at it that way, I have my parents to thank for giving me this gift, right? Because this has now become my profession. What if I was born in a different country or a different circumstances and I had never seen the violin in my entire life? What would I have become? It's really interesting. So it's very fascinating for me to think about how kids can have the world at their feet if they're given the right exposure and the right opportunities. And it's so exciting. And then when I think about the people who have such potential and don't have those opportunities, and what could be possible for them too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it makes me think of the Dr. Suzuki, right? Because like my
Yeah.
favorite in the Suzuki violin, it really talks about how talent is not necessarily inborn, but you have the environment and the support, and that's what makes people be able to become musicians.
That's a topic I'm really intrigued by: talent versus nurture and environment. Because when you look at some people who have, let's say, a specific talent, like even if it's something like math, sports, motor skills, mechanical gift, even if it's violin or whatever. I'm just curious what you see, like, especially in kids with your children and their peers. I mean, you must see that some children have a gift for something like baking, or something, right? Or art. And I just feel like, what's the right ratio of talent versus nurture versus environment? I'm always fascinated by that. What do you think? I'm curious what you think, actually.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. I don't think there's a right answer, like because I think for every person it's different, right?
Yeah.
I think some of it is the exposure. Obviously, if you're not exposed to it, you don't even know that you could
Yeah.
be interested in it.
Yeah.
And if some kids who are naturally have a talent, I think that's definitely possible. I think we all have gifts, right, in different ways. I also saw that you have perfect pitch, right? So, if that some people are born with that, right? Maybe that's also something you can learn. But I think some people have special talents that they're gifted with at birth. And if they're given the opportunity to nurture that and grow that, then it's kind of the perfect combination, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I mean,
I guess you
there's
have both, right?
yeah, there's no arguing that the combination of a natural gift, a born gift that you have combined with the environment, combined with application, like the proverbial 10,000 hours. There's no doubt about that. I'm just curious about how people can start at, let's say, different levels, starting levels, and then will they always do this? Or is it possible for that person to go up? I'm always fascinated by that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm also curious what you see in your students, right? Because I'm sure you've seen a lot of violin students who are naturally gifted, but maybe there are others who work hard and then they maybe can surpass the naturally gifted one if the naturally gifted one doesn't practice as much.
That's true. However, I have seen naturally gifted people just sit on their natural gift and it's so easy for them.
They don't have to practice.
Not really. Not really, because it's so easy for them already. It's like they sit at a 90% already. And then let's say the rest of us at 20, 30% have to work for that 40%, 50% to catch up. And then that person puts in a little bit of effort and they climb up a little. And if they put in a lot of effort, they soar. That's I don't know. Sometimes I think it's that way. And then in other special circumstances, I see some people who start off, middle of the road, and then years later, I see them, they've skyrocketed. They've clearly had some great training. So I guess it is possible. Anything's possible. Totally.
That's really interesting. So I want to go back to maybe your childhood.
Sure.
I know that you grew up in Canada. Is it
Yeah.
Newfoundland?
Yes.
And you're one of the few Asian families that were there.
Yeah. I mean, I was born in a very small town
Hmm.
in Newfoundland, and there were only two Asian families at the time in that town. It's still a small town. Then my family moved to the capital of Newfoundland, which is St. John's. And there's a much more, at the moment now, in 2021, there's a much more diverse community. But when I was growing up, it was definitely predominantly Caucasians, in Newfoundland. And it still is. We're still a minority. But we were even more of a minority back when I was growing up. So that it was funny because I would come home from school
Hmm.
and I would go look in the mirror and all of a sudden be surprised after a day of school. I look and say, wow, I look different from everybody else. I didn't feel any different from anybody else, but I looked different from everybody else. So it was a bit of a shock. And then when I left Newfoundland to go to Toronto, University of Toronto, I stepped into the faculty of music and I was taken aback because I had never seen so many Asian people in my life. So that was a bit of a culture shock. It was very funny. It's like, I've never seen so many Asian people. It was funny.
That's really interesting. I actually had
Yeah.
a very similar experience because I
Really?
lived in Ohio and it was like that, like 99% were white.
Yeah.
Sometimes like exactly that experience, like I didn't
Yeah.
feel like I was different, but when I look in the mirror, it's like, whoa, you know. And then when I went to college for engineering,
Yeah.
everybody was Asian. So
Yeah.
very interesting.
Oh! That is so fascinating that you have an engineering background and yet you play violin and piano. I mean, and you're just fascinating. You're just so incredibly talented in multiple places.
Oh, thank you. That's so sweet of you.
It's incredible. I mean, I don't have any engineering inclination whatsoever. The whole thing is very, very fascinating and cool to me. My brother's an engineer. He
Oh,
did engineering. Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
cool.
But my father and my brother, I think they laugh at me because I'm clueless with anything mechanical. They just laugh. I was home for the summer, well, because of pandemic, and I was living in Newfoundland with my family, and I was mowing the lawn for the first time in my life, believe it or not, because I moved to Toronto where I didn't have to mow a lawn. Anyway, so I'm helping my dad with a lawnmower, and he's just kind of looking at me with a grin and chuckle and a grin on his face because I had no idea where to pour the gasoline and how to start the lawnmower. He was just chuckling at me. And I said, hey, I'm not an engineer, I'm a musician.
That's funny. But there's
No.
a lot of physics in violin, right?
It's true. That is true. My father did actually major in physics and taught math. And they say that music is related to math, but I don't have that math. natural ability. Physics, I mean, physics is fascinating when you talk about acoustics, right? And about sound waves and the production of sound. And it's really interesting actually, because then you go into the waves and overtones and harmonic series. And yeah, in terms of that, it's very much related to physics. But it's so interesting that as a musician, we don't talk in terms of physics. Like it's related. It's built on physics, but music transcends so much more than physics because music is an art form. Is physics an art form? No. But an art form leverages itself on top of the properties of physics. So it's interesting how you can take a science, numbers, formulas, ratios, with rhythm, right? Ratios of rhythms, they're all math related, they're all physics related, but it's dry until you put some heart into it, until you put some imagination into it, until you put some creativity into it. Then the math and the physics becomes art. And then when you have art, then all of a sudden you're able to communicate. So it's nice how it's all related together. But yeah, it is related, physics and math. But I mean, without the heart, it's not art. Wow, I just rhymed.
That's true. And I think sometimes we think about like, you talk a lot about intonation, right? Like being in tune.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's like, well, if everything was perfect and if every rhythm was perfect,
Yeah.
then it wouldn't have that heart, right?
That's true. I've had people say, you know what, I like imperfections in performances. And there's people like me. I'm always striving for perfection. And I think a lot of classical musicians do, right? And yeah, I think it may get in our way because the more we strive for that perfect intonation and the absolute precise rhythm, we might stray from having that beautiful vulnerability and the heart. Because when you get so perfect and robotic, then you lose the heart. So it's nice to know that we can maybe find a balance between being human and imperfect and precise and thrilling, because some people do find that technical precision is very exciting to watch. I mean, that's why people love watching fast fingers, right? The faster your fingers can go, the more exciting a person thinks the performance is, right? But I also noticed too that the people who don't have much exposure to arts or artists get wowed by all the flashiness, right? The flashy technique. That person can move their feet so fast, a dancer, right? That figure skater can do so many turns, right? And then once you start to expose yourself to more and more art with heart, then you start to look past all the technique, all the technical precision. Okay, so you know what? That violinist can hit a 4-octave arpeggio in this amount of time, but they start to realize that doesn't touch me at all. It makes me go, oh, wow, that's so amazing. They can really move their fingers. And then all of a sudden, once you start to mature your appreciation for the art form, then you start to realize you crave some of that vulnerability. You crave some of that imperfection. You crave some of that almost those moments of, oh my God, are they going to almost lose it in the performance? Some of this imperfection, the human imperfection. So I don't know. There's this struggle in me between struggling for higher accuracy and also communicating what's beautiful to people. And sometimes if you go for too much beauty, it's not precise, right? And then when it's too precise, it's not beautiful.
There's
I
a
don't know. I find
balance.
that a very fascinating topic too. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's a balance, right? Well, in engineering, what do? You don't have this dilemma, do you?
You don't have to worry about the heart.
or, but engineers do have heart, right?
They do, they do. I mean,
Yeah.
I guess, you do work with people. Like in my job, I used to work a lot with teams. And
Okay.
in that sense, you have to, like everything you build is built by people, right? So,
Yeah.
in that sense, there is heart in that. And you build it for a purpose. You build it for people,
Yeah.
by
Yeah,
people.
you're serving. When you're an engineer, you're serving the population with what you can structure for them and make better, more efficient. Yeah. I think it's cool.
Yeah, yeah. And you play the piano as well, right? So you actually started with piano.
I did. I did. I was 7 when I started piano, and then 2 years later, the violin. So I was always known as a pianist, and that I played violin.
Mhm.
And the violin started to catch up, and I was equal. And then my music teachers started to say, you might want to start choosing one, and I couldn't choose. I was, I think, 13, 14 or something like that. And then when I was 15, I went to a national youth orchestra for one summer, and I couldn't find a piano to practice. I had my books, my music with me, and I couldn't find a piano. This is when I did see a piano, I would rush and try to practice, keep my fingers in shape.
Yeah.
And after that summer, I decided, you know what? I spent the entire summer on the violin. I'm just going to continue on the violin. And I was not able to stop my piano lessons though until I was 17. So I kept going with piano until I was finished high school. And now I've got my piano actually here, shipped from Newfoundland over
Wow.
the ocean. Yeah, it's in my home here in Toronto,
Wow.
and it's tuned, but it's still there, and I do use it to figure out things, chords. If I'm listening to something on the radio or just a piece that I'm studying, and I want to figure out a chord or something, then I'll learn some piano parts of my own repertoire and learn them, and then record them for myself. I've been meaning to post Prokofiev, actually, Prokofiev First Violin Concerto, just the me playing to the piano part, and I've done that. I just have to record it. Yeah.
That's so cool. I think piano is one of those fundamental instruments, right? Like if you know piano, then you can really use that for music theory and
Yeah.
composing and a lot of different things.
Yes, yes, that is a fundamental instrument. That's how I teach, or how I understand theory better, because I can actually put all the chords down. Like on the violin, it's difficult to play chords, and we can play chords, but it's more difficult. And with the keyboard, it's just so much faster. I can actually figure out a chord progression a little bit faster than on the violin. So yes, it comes in very handy, and I use it for teaching. I play the piano parts for my students. I'll use it to demonstrate theory for harmonic progressions. Um, I don't know if you saw my musicality workshop. I think it was almost a year ago. Did you see that? Maybe you didn't.
No,
Oh yeah, so I okay, yeah, I've actually turned that into a course, but yeah, it was fun to use the piano, this out of tune piano, to demonstrate. I actually demonstrated just the how different harmonies have different tension, and when you have the difference between tension, musical tension, and musical relaxation, that's what helps create heart in your art. Because if you become sensitive to tension and relaxation, you can actually become better at manipulating that, like a storyteller, right? When you tell a story, you set up some conflict, and then you you increase the tension of that conflict. You introduce things that add a bit more conflict and trouble and dissonance, right? Dissonance, and that can be represented in harmony and music and cadences and phrases and expression. And so when you know how to manipulate that on the violin or the piano, then all of a sudden you're actually telling a story with your music or touching the heart and generating emotions. So this is when the physics, right? The physics and the science and the math start to become a language of art and heart and music and just storytelling.
absolutely. So what made you decide to go with violin? I'm curious because I mean, for me, I started with piano. I always wanted to play violin, but I didn't really start until just about a year ago, like with actual lessons. I always thought for me, you could communicate more
Uh,
with the violin than on the piano because I think you're limited by the key.
oh,
I was curious what your thoughts are.
interesting. I don't think it was for me the same, actually. I never thought that the violin could communicate better than the piano. I think it's just a natural, let's say, gravitational pull to that instrument. If just one pulls you a little stronger than the other, that's simply it. It wasn't a matter of, oh, I think I could express myself better. I don't know. But that is interesting that you feel for you that you express yourself better on the violin than on the piano.
Yeah, I think there are just certain things that you can do on the violin, like you can't crescendo a note, right?
That's true.
And
On one single sustained pitch, you're right. That is true.
and
Once you strike a key.
yeah, I can't do vibrato yet, but I think that's really beautiful when people do that, and you
Ah,
can't do that on the piano. Um,
that's so true. Vibrato and sustaining, those are two very important ones.
and then
This is true.
also like just being a little bit off pitch, right? Because in
Ah,
piano you can't be off pitch at all, you just can't.
yeah.
But in violin, there's a little bit of wiggle space.
Yes, that's true. You can manipulate. Once you get a mastery of pitch, then you can start to manipulate the pitch. Like this is what singers do naturally. They're
Mhm.
always constantly bending the intonation and it sounds great, right? We love it. We hear that all the time in pop music,
Mhm.
jazz all the time. And it's true with the violin, you can slide into a note and make that in any character you want, whether you want it to be uh, lyrical or sly or foreboding, those kind of things you can do. I mean, pianists will have to do it in their own way, perhaps with timing and dynamic, right? Timing and dynamic, and maybe well, with a touch that affects the dynamic, and also the articulation. And those three things I actually teach in my musicality workshop. I actually brought those variables up in my musicality workshop. When you want to manipulate the music and start to tell a story and create art, you use these techniques. These are tools that you can use, right? Just like in engineering, I'm sure you have all these principles that you adhere to. In music, it's the same. You can manipulate timing, you can manipulate dynamic, you can manipulate articulation, articulation. You
Mhm.
can you can create a phrase that's longer, or you create a phrase that's really short. Timing, tempo, all those things that can you with all just a mixed bag of tricks, right? And then you start to choose these tricks, combine them together in your own unique way, and that becomes your signature voice and your own artistic stamp. So I find musicality really fascinating. Um, but I find it interesting how you might be able to compare it to being an engineer, because you're so creative being an engineer, because you're coming up with your own solutions and combining your own variables, right?
I guess so. I haven't done engineering for a long time, so
Oh, okay, yeah. But I do think that it's the same, right? When you're creating, right? In any forum. Like you could be a chef, right?
Mhm.
You could be a designer. You could be a car. You could be a car manufacturer or whatever. You're putting these variables together and you're creating something new, something that is has never been seen before, or
Mhm.
touches the senses in a different way, right? Like you can see a combination of, let's see, that color with that palette, that pattern onto that shape, in a, let's say, a car, a shape of a car or something like that, combined with that wheel. And does it work? I guess you have to see and test it, right? Same with music. We have to see, does that work if you're a composer, right? If you compose a piece, does that tempo work with that style in that instrumentation with this form followed by that bridge? And it's just the possibilities are endless. So
Mhm.
I'm kind of riffing here, but creativity is very very interesting in any art form or any discipline. So
Yeah, definitely. And I also think that it's really fascinating how with classical music, right, you're not really composing, but everybody can play it in a very different way. And it's
oh
very,
yes.
very new.
Yes. Well, we see that in film too, don't we? We see remakes of movies all the time, and look how different one version of a film is from the next. Or one actor playing the same role, or Shakespeare done many different ways, or the same actor playing, a different role. Let's look how many James Bonds there are. How many actors have played James Bond? Each James Bond is slightly different, right? So each violinist playing the Tchaikovsky violin different. Same notes, exactly the same notes, but each one would be very, very different. I mean, it's so funny how you would take, let's say, the same human being wearing the same uh, cut of jeans, and each pair of jeans would look different on every single human being, right?
Right.
It's the same. You put a violin, you put the same violin, the same exact instrument. You take that instrument, hand it over to someone else, and that violin is going to sound completely different.
Hmm.
Yeah, everyone puts their own spin, their own voice, their own footprint, handprint. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you decided to become a professional violinist, was that a difficult choice for you? Like
No,
consider
actually,
other professions, you're like, no, I'm definitely doing this.
it there was never a moment where I had to stop and say I need to make a choice. Like for example, I had to make a choice between piano and violin. I had to think about it. But while I was on the track of being studying the instrument, I was so deep in that trench. I was so deep in that mode. There was no other world. I was in that world already
Mhm.
and just kept going. Just kind of, you sit in a track, you're on that track, you keep riding, and there was no end. I'm still on that track now, still learning, still on it. So there was no moment where I had to decide, do I do this? Do I do that? I'm not sure. I never had to struggle in that direction. So I'm very fortunate. I know some people do look for their path. What's their path? What are their gifts? Where their talents lie? What do they want to do with their life? I guess it always chose me. I guess that's how I look at it.
Yeah, but you're also very multi-talented, right? Like you started your own teaching business, right? Not
I
only
did.
teaching, but also the online workshops and your boot camps, and that's really entrepreneurial spirit right there. So even though that's still related to violin, I think I'm sure you have so many other skills that you had to develop to make all of that happen.
That's true. Those are skills that, like an instrument, I had to nurture and develop and practice. So, just like I have to learn how to play an arpeggio and then master it over many decades, I had to realize, oh, there's some skills here that I need to learn being an entrepreneur. Like we've always had to write in school, right? We've always had to write assignments, stories, papers, reports. But all of a sudden, I had to take that skill and really branch out in a certain direction. How to write for the purpose of being visible on social media. That's a different type of writing. So that's a skill that I had to fine tune, and how to present yourself on camera, how to present yourself on social media platforms, how to disseminate virtual content on multiple platforms which have individual algorithms and different characteristics. You're right. Like I did have to learn a bunch of different skills as an entrepreneur. Um, I mean, I think anybody can really learn them. It depends on how much you enjoy it. I mean, this might come back down again to environment and talent and nurture and drive too, and interest. I think another part of that conversation that we had about how one person can shoot up in terms of ability, right? The other part of that, so this the part of the formula, this natural born talent, then there's hard work, then there's the environment. But I think there's a fourth element to that, and that fourth element has to be passion,
Hmm.
motivation,
Yeah.
because you can have all of that, but if the person just wants to sit down and relax and read books all the time, or that's fine, or go swimming or go to the beach or something, then that talent won't be fostered, or that area, that arena won't be explored. So becoming an entrepreneur has not been easy, but there is a drive, right? So I do have that drive and the motivation. So yeah, I have been exploring that. Yeah.
So awesome. And what is it like being back on stage? So you're performing again with
Yeah.
no ballet. What-
It's funny because it's been so long, and 20 months, I believe it has been. 20 months is almost 2 years. That's a long time. But yet, when we go back to the opera house, it feels like nothing has changed. It feels like it's just stepping back in, like you just pause the clock, and then 20 months later, you just resume. So the only thing different now is that we're wearing masks and we're not sitting together. We're distancing, and we've got to check in and make sure we do COVID tests. We're testing for COVID twice a week, actually, before we go to work. Yes. And we submit our negative COVID test online before we can show up into the building. And then we day with a personal screening. Have you displayed any symptoms? All this kind of thing. So it feels like we never left in a way, but the energy is different. The audience, you can tell the audience missed us. They're just so appreciative in their applause. You can tell. So it does feel nice that way. And our first performance back was actually quite emotional. It really was. It was so thrilling to be back in an environment where you're creating that art together, and there's people out there who were craving it. You didn't know they missed it. They didn't know they missed it until they were in the seats, and you could hear their enthusiasm, their emotion, and the dancers felt that we felt that it was really thrilling. So that's been different. It's much different than performing online. It's just a physical experience when you can hear that music all around you. It's great.
That's wonderful. It sounds like you've got the best job.
Yeah, it's not a bad job to show up to work. I mean, the Opera House is gorgeous. We're in the Four Seasons Center for the Performing Arts here in Toronto. And when I stop to think about it, I look out and see how beautiful the hall is. It's a very modern hall.
Mhm.
and it's stunning to look at. The lobby is really pretty, and when I look at how pretty the lobby is, say to myself, "This is my office." I show up to work here. Like this couldn't be better. And the acoustic is wonderful. We have great colleagues. We've got a great organization. It's run very well. You know what? I can't complain. It's a nice way to make a living. And to think that after studying violin and piano after all these years, and I could do this and still do it and make a living. Yeah, I think I'm pretty fortunate.
That's wonderful. I saw on your website that when you started at the National Ballet, you were one of the youngest people.
I believe I definitely was the youngest to enter. And I've been there for a long time. So of course, I'm no longer the youngest, but yes, I was when I started. Yeah.
Was that intimidating for you?
A little because I had no experience in professional life. So I had to make a lot of mistakes and learn and quickly learn what was good etiquette inside of an orchestra, what is expected of professional musicians, and just had to learn how to deal with many elements. Like, for example, how do you match the rest of your colleagues? That's a skill that you really need to hone. This is the sign of a good team player, right? And well, let's say an athlete, when you get to the professional level, you start to learn that skill. You really start to learn how to work with your teammates, and that's a skill that you start to develop when you're starting as a youth, right? So we study that in school for sure, but until you get to a professional setting, you start to realize, boy, I really got to step it up here. So that was a big learning curve for me. I definitely the youngest, feeling like everyone else had way more years of experience. So yes, it did take a few years to catch up. That's what it felt like for me. So it's interesting now to see, I think, students who are coming into the professional life, and I feel like they're actually more prepared than I was when I first entered. So maybe they're just more with it. They've infiltrated better than I did when I first started.
Do you have any funny stories that you like to share
Oh
from
gosh, yeah.
the one to embarrass yourself?
Oh gosh, let me choose carefully here. Well, I mean, I once dropped my violin in Sleeping Beauty.
Oh no, during the performance?
Yes, I actually wrote a blog post on my website, and I think I called it "My Violin Broke into Two Pieces." Yeah, I. This is really funny, Jennifer, because right now I'm experimenting with shoulder rest. So I took off my shoulder rest, and I've been using the shoulder rest for what, almost 20 years. And I'm now using just a small spongy pad that adheres to the back of the instrument. So it's very similar to, oh, how many years ago was it when I was experimenting with no shoulder rest? So it was actually very bare here. And I was thinking, oh, I'm so cool, like my teacher, because he didn't play with anything right here. And I started not realizing to play like this constantly. And this is so not healthy. And eventually I developed such neck tension in this muscle that it started to pinch all the nerves and my hands started to fatigue. Injury working with a physiotherapist and trying to relax this muscle and do some rehabilitation on it. So I was playing a Sleeping Beauty show, and I'm still in this mode of trying to find the least amount of work and tension in this muscle. And we're playing Sleeping Beauty, and there's a lot of tremolo, right? It's just a lot of this in Sleeping Beauty. And so we're climbing up high, high, higher, 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 and then the violin just disappears from the back of my shoulder. There's no pad, right? There's nothing here. It's so slippery. So the rest of the orchestra is still playing, and I've got nothing in my hand except for a bow. It's so bad. I was frozen in shock, and so yeah, I tell the story in my blog. But Dominique is the principal second violin. She stopped doing her tremolo. She stopped. She said she goes down, picks up her violin. She said, "It's okay, Lynn." She hands it back, and then she goes back to her tremolos. So the first thing I wanted to do was make sure the violin was in tune still. So I just wanted to pluck A, and as soon as I did that, the fingerboard was whoosh, like this. The fingerboard was completely unglued, untethered. I just sat there and waited for them to finish Act Two. And Act Two finished, and I we luckily have a violin maker, a viola maker in our orchestra, Johan. So I gave it to Johan, and what he did was he took my violin home and glued the fingerboard overnight. I sat in the audience for Act Three and watched Act Three, and the next day was a Sunday matinee, and I was playing the next day. So, yeah, that was my Sleeping Beauty story.
Wow. Well, that's
Yeah.
very handy to have a violin maker in the orchestra.
Oh, yeah, he saved my life there. Yeah. Yeah, it was pretty scary to see my violin face down on the floor. I couldn't believe it. There was another story too. We were playing a new ballet called Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, based on Alice in Wonderland. And the concertmaster has a second violin that's tuned. So instead of G, D, A, E, the G string is tuned up to G sharp, I believe, and the E string is tuned down to an A flat, or maybe the G string remains. Anyway, the E string is definitely tuned down to an E flat. And when you play that second violin, it sounds very sinister, and that's supposed to be the Queen of Hearts in Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. So the top of the ballet starts, it's the prologue, introductory music. You start to see things on stage, Alice, the rabbit, things like that. And then they introduce this Queen of Hearts music, right? So not long, maybe page and a half into the ballet, the concertmaster is supposed to switch violins and play this on the second violin. Well, guess what happens? At the top of the ballet, Aaron's E string snapped. And so he didn't have a violin. So I gave him my violin. He gave me his, and the top of the ballet. And so the conductor sees this, and he's starting, but he has no choice but to start the ballet. The E string broke, and so he's looking down at me. Everyone can see that Aaron no longer has that his second violin or whatever. Oh yeah, it was the second violin, I think, that had the broken E string. So he handed me that violin so I had to. He luckily had an E string in his pocket, and I was furiously taking off the E string, trying to feed it into the hole in the dark. And meanwhile, the ballet is going and the music is going, and I'm following the music to see where they are. Or the solo is coming. And I'm tuning this E string, and I'm tuning. Is it at an E flat? Is it an E flat? Oh my gosh! Oh my gosh! Is it at a... And finally, I hand it over to him, and then he plays his solo. I was like, that was the scariest thing, but I managed to get that E string on fast and tune it to E flat. Boy, that was really scary. Yeah.
Wow, so you have to be really good at changing strings.
I had to be fast at everything. Oh my gosh, things have happened in the pit, Jennifer. Like a sword has come down in Romeo and Juliet.
Oh,
Yeah, I'm gonna probably write a blog too about the day there was a gun shooting down the street in the shopping mall in Eaton Center, a very major shopping center in downtown Toronto. And the concertmaster at the time, he witnessed it, and he couldn't play the show. He was in too much shock, and I had to step up without any rehearsal. And I had zero rehearsal. It was a contemporary piece I'd never played before, and I played that show, and I had no chance to rehearse it. So one day I'll
sight
write that
reading
story
it?
too. Pardon me?
So you had to sight read it?
I watched the rehearsals, believe it or not. There was a few rehearsals that I watched, and they said, "Why are you here, Lynn? You don't have to be here." I said, "Oh, I'm just following the music and just learning the part, I suppose." It was a contemporary piece, and yeah, it was a world premiere. And when I was told that I had to play and go on stage, it was, I think, 45 minutes before the show started. So I just kind of stuck the music on, glued my eyes to everyone else and the conductor. It was well, I was in shock that I heard there was a gun shooting,
Yeah.
right? So I think that put me into shock, but also just fearing for my life. I had to sight read this. I can't make a mistake. Yeah, it was tough.
Wow. At least it's a contemporary piece. No one knows what it should sound like.
That's true. This is a good point. That's
Except for
true.
the
Contemporary.
composer. I'm sure the composer would know.
Well, they luckily they weren't there, so that's a good point. Even if I had not played the right notes, who would know the difference? I suppose. Yeah.
Wow, that's so amazing. So I just want to ask the last question.
Uh-huh.
For students who might be considering a professional music career, what advice do you have for those who are just in their teens or early years in college and considering becoming a professional musician, but maybe a little bit unsure if that's really the path for them?
Okay. Well, it's it's no secret that becoming a musician requires a lot of discipline and a lot of hard work. If your heart is not 100% in it, I would I would advise to have options open. And even if the options just mean widening your perspective. So let's take, for example, the fact that I've opened my world becoming an entrepreneur. It's not a bad idea to consider a music career that is a little bit more off the beaten and familiar track of, let's say, teaching, orchestra, choir conductor, or whatever. What if you were to incorporate some entrepreneurial ideas that involve using the internet, right? Concert presentation that uses media platforms of the future. It's totally possible. And what if you paired up with someone who's actually very good at creating the newest app, the newest concert platform using a digital platform? That's possible. YouTube, for example, is a digital platform.
Mhm.
TikTok is a digital platform. Is it possible to use these platforms and create a career? Yes, we've seen this. We've seen it many times. There are YouTubers who are great musicians, right? Musicians who are great YouTubers. And they've actually made a 100% career using these platforms. This is what I mean by saying finding alternative, new, innovative ways to become your artistic self, finding your audience and reaching that audience, but not necessarily in the old models of concert halls with people in seats, right? This is a traditional model. Nothing wrong with that. We still need that model. But let's actually open up the box a little wider. If you want to become that musician that makes it as your career, find a way to express yourself, but find it in a way that you can actually um, combine other skills, other talents, and perhaps forge a new path. Because this is not going to be easy, as we know. Let's say in orchestras, for example, jobs are very few and far between, and winning a job is very difficult. So I don't necessarily recommend hitting the audition circuit, because you may be hitting that audition circuit for a very long, long time before you win a job. What do you do in the meantime? Gig around? Get a part-time job? Sure, you can absolutely do that. But what if your part-time job was increasing your skills in another arena? Let's take, for example, me. I've used the internet, leveraged the power of various platforms to reach more people, to build a brand, to build a let's say, a company of my own so that I can educate others. And by educating others, I'm tapping into my passion for teaching and for expressing myself as an artist, and I'm helping other people. And I'm supplementing my own career by doing so. So it is possible. It really is. I mean, you can choose TikTok as your platform. You could broadcast on any live streaming platform, and people have done that for sure. Absolutely. Um, Twitch, Twitch can be explored if you want to live stream. If you're really good on camera, Twitch could be your media platform of choice. And some people have come TikTokers, full time TikTokers. This is all possible. So that's my advice for people considering music as their career. Start to think outside of the box, because it's possible. How can you serve people? How can you give them what they want? Entertain them in a way that can be sustaining, financially sustaining for you. This is something that's very important, I think, to become a musician that survives.
Absolutely. And that goes back to what you were talking about before about exposing kids or exposing people who may not have access to music. I think all of these platforms make it more possible.
It is totally possible. I mean, most people I would hope have an internet connection. And with that internet connection, you can reach anybody. You literally can reach anybody. Let's say you have any teenager now with an internet connection can reach a teenager across the world. And if you're able to monetize that somehow, figure out a way to entertain them or help them or educate them, this is possible to monetize. Absolutely. I have followers from all over the world. In fact, I think the number two location of my Instagram followers is in Iran.
Oh,
Many of my followers are from Tehran, which is interesting. I find that very interesting.
wow. Thank you so much, Lynn. Thank you
Oh,
so
my
much.
pleasure.
It's been such a pleasure talking with you and
Yes, you
hearing
too.
about your experiences and stories. I feel like we could just keep talking,
Oh
but
yeah, yeah. I like talking.
stick
So
to
I mean,
music.
anytime you want to chat, I'm here.
Thank you so much. I
My
appreciate it so
pleasure.
much.
Thanks,
Thank
Jennifer.
you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this interview. If you'd like to learn more about the violin or hear more from Dr. Lynn, definitely check out her YouTube channel and her Instagram page, her website. There's so much more information. I highly recommend it. And if you like other interviews, please leave those in the comments below. Let me know what kind of interviews you want to hear, and I will try to find those amazing people to talk to. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit the like button. Hopefully, we get to that 100 subscribers, and I will release my interview video with you. See you next time.